Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome you back and ask you all please to be seated. I'm going to do the same here. Sorry. This discussion that we're going to have in a few minutes today is part of the program called 80 Years Ago, 80 Years Hence, hence being the British and more archaic term for looking into the future. One of the things that Churchill believed strongly in throughout his life, really, was that by looking to the past, by looking at history, we can see patterns. We can hear stories, we can be informed by them, incorporate those lessons of the past into our present lives, and Churchill, ever the optimist, was always looking forward, believing that studying history could in fact be beneficial to our future. And in that spirit, we're going to talk a little bit about the past, the present, and then looking a little bit ahead to the future. We had hoped to have one of our good friends and dear friends, Churchill fellow, some of you know, Earl Harbison, who was at the speech 80 years ago yesterday, to be with us. But unfortunately, Earl is not able to join us. He's quite old, and he sends his greetings to everyone, but he was not here. I will tell the story, however, of Earl Harbison. He was a young man living in St. Louis when a buddy of his called him and said, I hear that Winston Churchill and President Truman are going to be speaking at Westminster College. Well, why don't we get in the car? And why don't we drive to Fulton and see if we can catch a glimpse? That's all he wanted to do. It turns out that Earl and his friend listened to the speech on loudspeakers outside the historic gymnasium. It was just the gymnasium then. And he heard the speech. That really inspired Earl to go into a career with the CIA in its infancy, and a very successful business career as well. And he remembers vividly that day here at Westminster College. Years later, some of you, I think we were there, we honored Earl in St. Louis, and he said, I really wanted to get into the gym, but I didn't have a ticket. So on behalf of the college and the museum, we presented Earl with an original ticket to the Iron Curtain speech. It's one of the great treasures that he holds. So I know he couldn't be with us today, but for those of you who know him, please send him our well wishes and greetings. We will be joined in a few moments by another alumnus of Westminster College, Mr. Bill Reller, who will tell some stories about how this place came to being. Bill is a very good, was a close friend with Dr. Davidson, the president of Westminster College, who had the idea to make this church. So we'll be talking with Bill in a few moments. But I think in the spirit of looking back, Churchill once said early in his career, in 1909, it has been said that words are the only thing that really last forever. And I think the testament of the Iron Curtain speech and the words that we saw 80 years ago from the Westminster College Gymnasium and the draft of the speech downstairs are proof positive. Those words still resonate and are still with us today. But I think it's also important that there are memories that don't last forever. Words may, memories don't always. Is to talk to people like Earl, to talk to people like Bill Reller, to look at the oral archive and the history of those who were there and remember firsthand what happened. Because history is very, very complex. And moments in between the big lines in the speech happen. When did the audience applause, for instance? You don't see that when you read the speech. But if you listen to the recording of that speech or hear someone who was there at the speech, those help give a fuller picture of history. So it's important, I think, for us to take into account these eyewitness histories of the speech. To put things in context, and I know this is a familiar story to many of you in the room, but we're often asked here on a daily basis by visitors who come to America's National Churchill Museum from around the world, why? why is this museum in Fulton, Missouri? And I think most of you know the story, but I'll take you back 81 years almost ago. The war in Europe had ended. The Allied victory, as pronounced by Winston Churchill on VE Day, May the 8th, 1945, was a momentous occasion for Churchill and for the Allies. Churchill was on the balcony in Whitehall giving his famous V for victory symbol to the crowds assembled below, saying, "This is your victory." And we know from recordings they were shouting back, "No, it's yours, Winston." It was a jubilant moment. The war in Europe had ended. Politics goes on. And a few months later, there was a general election in Great Britain. And Americans in particular find this fascinating and say, how could it happen? But in the general election, Churchill's party lost. He won the war, but his party lost the election. He retained his seat, but he was now the leader of the opposition party in Britain, so he was no longer prime minister. He won the war, he lost the election. He was out of a job. And it's extraordinarily interesting to me that at the time of the election, Churchill was in Potsdam, a suburb of Berlin, with Joseph Stalin and the relatively new President Harry Truman, and they were discussing how the end of the war and the post-war era would evolve. That election happened. Churchill was recalled back to England, and he learned the results. He was out. Clement Attlee was in. The conference continued in Berlin, and Churchill's chair was filled by Clement Attlee. Churchill, by all accounts, was despondent. He was somewhat depressed. His wife Clementine famously tried to console him and said, "Winston, I think this is a blessing in disguise," to which he said, "It's very effectively disguised." And it was not long after that moment that Churchill received this letter from Westminster College, Don Loafy's predecessor, Frank McClure, also like our current president, Don Loafy, an alumnus of this great institution. And Frank McClure, who had a job to do in the summer of 1945, decided, who are we going to invite to the college to deliver Westminster College's famous John Finley Green Foundation lecture. It's an endowed lectureship that exists to this day to bring eminent individuals to the campus to talk about global affairs. And President McClure was actually on vacation in Minnesota in the summer, and I think it was his wife, Ida Bell McClure, who said, "Why don't we bring Winston Churchill?" Exactly the response. It was silence. Really? But they made a play, and the president of the college, McClure, wrote this letter inviting Churchill to come to give the John Finley Green Foundation lecture in 1946. And I think that most historians agree that Churchill, if he had received the letter as written and typed and signed by the president of the college, might have said, "Thank them very much. I'm not exactly sure where Fulton is, but let them down gently. I can't come." However, in one of the most famous postscripts in history, there's a handwritten note on the bottom of the page that said, "This is a wonderful school in my home state. If you come, I'll introduce you. Regards, Harry Truman." And when Churchill saw that note, and you can see a copy of the letter on display downstairs in the galleries, Churchill knew he had more to say about global affairs. He knew that the story of history kept marching on, and he saw particularly what was happening in Eastern Europe as a threat. So he knew full well that if the President of the United States was at his side, no matter where he was in the world would tune in. And so Churchill, when he saw that famous postscript, elected to come to North America. And he did what a lot of people do in January and February. He went to South Florida. He's a very wise man. And he spent about almost 2 months in Miami Beach, a short trip to Cuba, relaxing after all those years of war. Painting. Some of you have just participated in a paint and sip program, and you have actually painted and recreated one of the paintings, the original oil paintings by Winston Churchill, which is currently on display downstairs in the gallery that he painted there on the right. It's called A View of Miami at Sunset. Churchill had 2 months to think and ruminate and prepare the words that he spoke here 80 years ago yesterday. I think this is important. Churchill often wrote so many wonderful speeches. Think of those great wartime speeches in 1940. Those were often written quickly. Events of the war were unfolding fast, and Churchill had to prepare those speeches. And Churchill, for those of you who don't know, wrote his own speeches. Churchill did not have a ghostwriter. And in the war, they were prepared relatively quickly. In this case, Churchill had almost 2 months to craft the message in Miami Beach, of all places. And that day, 80 years ago, yesterday, Churchill did in fact come to Fulton and Westminster College with President Truman at his side. You see here Churchill and Truman in the motorcade, an open-air car, motoring down Court Street in our Brick District. For those of you who are in from out of town, I encourage you to go down and see the beautiful Brick District. It looks very much, in some ways, like it did in 1946. And you can see in the lower left hand, looking at the camera, is the president of the Westminster College, Frank McClure, the person who wrote the invitation. And I always like the look in his eyes. I kind of recognize it. He's somewhat like in terror. The day's finally arrived, and we've got to pull this off. But they did. And the speech that Churchill gave is preserved in a very splendid fashion downstairs. I mentioned it earlier. We have the near final draft of the Iron Curtain speech, The Sinews of Peace, on display. And it's in our collection. It's one of our great treasures of the museum and the college. I love this particular version of the speech because it shows Churchill's mind at work. And this is the first page. It says, "Mr. Clark, here it is." And it's signed by his secretary, Joe Sturdy. This draft of the speech was given to Colonel Frank Clark, who was Churchill's host in Miami Beach. He was a Canadian retired colonel who had a home in Miami Beach and graciously hosted Winston Churchill for those 2 months when he was in Miami Beach. Colonel Clark was the recipient of this near-final draft, and Joe Sturdy gave it to him. And the speech is fascinating. For those of you who don't know Churchill's speeches, this is a great example of a presentation copy, if you will. The speech is typed out almost like poetry. It's one of the reasons he was such an extraordinary speaker. He memorized, he had a great memory. He memorized a lot of his speeches. And you can see here the typewritten drafts, almost like a psalm. And what you're looking at in this photograph, and I encourage you to see the real thing downstairs, is the carbon copy of the speech. Churchill, you have to imagine, is looking at the original pages, practicing and looking at the speech. And his secretary, Joe Sturdy, is taking down his dictation in shorthand. The last-minute additions and rhetorical flourishes to the page. And you can see here, the typewritten thing says, "I am glad to come to Westminster this afternoon." And Churchill, always clever, said, "The name Westminster seems somehow familiar to me." And of course, as a child and an adult of the House of Commons, Churchill knew well Westminster Palace. And for him to become at Westminster College, he loosens the audience, who immediately recognized that was a humorous line. And he said, I have a lot in common with Westminster. It's where I, too, received a better part of my education. And he goes through the speech, and we want to encourage you again to see the whole thing downstairs. And he says in the speech that he is alone. He's not acting on behalf of the British government. He's a private citizen. He acknowledges somewhat inherently that he's no longer PM. He lost that election. And he says this.
"Let me, however, make it clear that I have no official mission or statement of any kind. I speak only
the laughter. Note the laughter. I mean, when you read the speech or hear, in a textbook or online, you don't hear the laughter. But what is the audience laughing about? Well, they're laughing because they see Churchill behind a lectern and the President of the United States in this grand platform party. It's not just what you see. It's a very, very solemn and dignified occasion. And I think the audience recognizes that immediately with laughter. So Churchill then progresses and really talks about what he observes to be the situation in Central Europe, and that the threat of Soviet communism and its spread was real for Winston Churchill. After all, he saw, after the war, the Americans went home, the British went home. Stalin, who came in from the East, stayed put. That's the Iron Curtain that Churchill talks about. There was no barrier. It was a metaphor. It was an ideological divide that Churchill mentions. And he mentions the police states that were threatening to govern in those occupied areas. But I think Churchill not only gives us the warning in the speech of an Iron Curtain, but more importantly, and this is something I think that we need to lift up even more, and it's very clear when you read the full speech, is that he gives an answer. He identifies a problem, and he identifies an answer to that problem. And his answer is in freedom and liberty and democracy. This passage of the speech says we must never cease to proclaim in fearless tones what Churchill calls elsewhere in the speech the title deeds of freedom: habeas corpus, common law, free and fair elections. All of these things, Churchill says, find their most famous expression in the Declaration of Independence. Find their most famous expression in the Declaration of Independence. Here, by the way, is where Churchill puts a last-minute flourish on the speech. He adds the word American. Make no doubt, he knows where he is. And he asks Joe Sturdy to write in the word, all of these things find their most famous expression in the American Declaration of Independence. These are the title deeds of freedom, Churchill says. And again, he identifies a problem, but he provides us with a solution and answer. He calls the speech, not the Iron Curtain speech, but he gives it the title, The Sinews of Peace. What are sinews? Sinews are things that bind us together. They make us stronger when exercised. And Churchill is arguing that between governments like the United States, in his nation, Britain, these governments who have such great history and shared common language and shared values of liberty and democracy, working together in alliances could combat the Iron Curtain. That's what the speech is about. And that's one of the reasons it continues to resonate, I think, over the decades. And why so many leaders have followed in Churchill's footsteps to Westminster College. The 50th anniversary, 30 years ago, some of you were here when Lady Thatcher, Margaret Thatcher, was here, following in her predecessor's footsteps to make similar remarks and echoing and reflecting upon the value of liberty, democracy, and freedom. She also issued a warning, some of you may remember, in the Champ Auditorium just across the way. She warned of the threat of militant Islam in 1996. 5 years before 9/11. So like Churchill before, she is seeing ahead a little bit. And all of these leaders and all of these individuals who seem to come to Westminster College, and it's really extraordinary for this small college to have such a global impact by following in Churchill's footsteps. And it all has to do with this speech. The aftermath to the speech, of course, was historic. The immediate aftermath, it was mixed. Some people thought, well, Churchill might be threatening to have a third world war. Others thought he was spot on. History, a year later, developed the Truman Doctrine. Truman, by the way, at first distanced himself from the speech. It was very uncharacteristic of President Truman to say, well, I didn't know what he's going to say. We know that Truman saw the speech, but he distanced himself immediately. But after a year, the Truman Doctrine was in force and in place. And a lot of the things that Churchill was talking about in this speech came to pass. Fast forward now to the 1960s. Westminster College is looking for a way to commemorate the speech. Churchill's 88 years old and has 2 years left in his long life. And he endorsed a project, a crazy project, that was hatched by Dr. Davidson, the president of Westminster College at the time, Robert Larry Davidson. And Dr. Davidson, as I alluded to earlier this morning when the governor was here, had a bold idea and said, instead of building a plaque or putting up a statue or putting a sculpture and a little sign that says Churchill spoke here, he was a visionary. And he said, why don't we bring this building, which was left in ruins in London, and the post-war economy in Britain was such they couldn't afford to rebuild it, they couldn't afford to take it down. And the college said, why don't we make a play to rebuild it on our campus, to honor Churchill's speech. And they did. It was an extraordinary moment. President Kennedy became involved, President Johnson, after Kennedy was killed, Presidents Truman and Eisenhower all lent their names. It was a national effort to make this memorial rise from the ashes. And one of the great leaders who made that happen was, in fact, Larry Davidson, and he was a true visionary. And there's a gentleman here who knew him quite well, and I'd like to welcome Bill. Would you mind coming up and telling us a little bit about Dr. Davidson and how this place came to be and your memories? Ladies and gentlemen, this is Mr. Bill Reller, Westminster class of 1956, am I correct? A veteran and great supporter and friend of this place, and a Churchill Fellow.
Well, I don't know that the clap is needed or deserved because I've never been known to be a public speaker. And so not too comfortable up here, but in any event, let me go to some notes. Regarding the speech itself, or regarding the church, Larry and I became pretty good friends. I graduated in '56. He became the president in '55. And over, 25 years, I probably saw him every other year. I was on the board of trustees for some time, and every time I'd come back, I would visit with Larry and Lois at their home. And then also Jack Marshall, I would go to see him. In any event, I recall an incident. When I left here, I migrated to California. I've lived in Palo Alto for about 70 years. And so Larry and the Westminster entourage would come out because at that time they were still interested in recruiting students from the West Coast. And I recall one evening up in San Francisco, in the rain, in the car, and we just had, a very personal talk. And he said, at commencement in 1961, he was thumbing through a Life magazine, and he saw this expansive article on the destruction by the Blitz of many of the churches in London, including this very church. And the article, they were going to move forward. This is 61, 15 years after the war was over, but the structure was still standing. And so it was going to be torn down. And so his thumbing through the Life magazine that day before commencement was the beginning of what we have here right now. He was just an outstanding leader. Coming here and what he did in the time that he was here, 56 to 71, if that's what it was, 15 years about that. So many things, the quadrangle, whatever. I just, I had the opportunity to know him and Lois, really, both on a very personal basis. And I knew well he was a great stamp collector. And he had his tragic automobile accident, which ended his life when about at age 90. Anyhow, I don't know if there's much more to say. Let me just check some notes here. I can do a little anecdote if you want. But
Tell us, you told me a great story last night, Bill, about, we mentioned the famous note from President Truman, but presidential postscripts don't just happen. The reason we have a postscript on the letter was because of a Westminster College alumnus named Harry Vaughan.
Well, how did you trigger that name? This hasn't been rehearsed. I read David McCullough's biography on Truman. Came out last year, 800 pages, a wonderful piece of writing. And McCullough felt that Truman was one of the outstanding presidents of our time. In the book, I had been reminiscing, and here's a quote. Harry Truman was for comic relief Truman's Falstaff. Now, I don't know what the Falstaff was, but I came to Westminster in 1952. A sophomore and a pledge brother was David Meriwether Vaughan. And his dad was Harry Vaughan, Truman's adjutant. And because father-son, Harry would come here on occasion, a rather portly guy, usually with a cigar. And so I met him a couple times. And so then I linked together, we had this mascot, big Great Dane dog. Its name was Falstaff. Now, I don't know what the connection was, but I do believe there was a connection. So, you know.
So Vaughan was Truman's Falstaff, and your fraternity dog.
Say that again?
Harry Vaughan was Truman's Falstaff.
Yes.
And your dog was Falstaff too.
Yes. I don't think that's a coincidence.
I don't think so either. And Harry Vaughan was the one who encouraged President Truman to add that signature. So it all comes full circle.
Yeah, Harry graduated from here.
Right.
He was an alumnus from here, I think, 1916, something like that.
So these networks, never for those alums in the audience, you know this, but for those who didn't graduate or haven't had the pleasure of graduating from Westminster College yet, the alumni network is a powerful one. It really is, and these connections really matter. And I think these are the stories of history. By looking at these individual stories of who said what when and how the people connect, that make this an incredible rich story. Because it's a very unlikely place to have the Iron Curtain speech given, and it really is those individuals who made it happen.
I found another quote here from the book, and Harry Vaughan saying about Truman, he was one tough son of a bitch, of a man that was part of a secret to understand, it was a part of the secret to understanding him. When you read the book, you just realize how true that was. He made a lot of very, very tough decisions. As the war, before the war ended, he learned of the atomic bomb. He made that decision. He made the decision to go into Korea, and that part of the world would not be as it is today had he U.S. and UN forces not gone into Korea. By the way, I spent some 15 months there myself in peacetime.
The memorial project, as it was called, the Churchill Memorial Project, went up on schedule after that famous Life magazine. And by the way, if you haven't seen it, downstairs in the galleries, there's an exhibition on the construction of the church. You'll find that Life magazine open to the page depicting the ruined church. So we continue to tell that story really on a daily basis when the next generation of folks come through. And really, I think that's the next part of this. 80 years passed, 80 years ago. We've spoken a lot about that yesterday and today. We'll continue to do that. But what happened since 1946, and more importantly, what's happening in the future from now, is incredibly important. And that's the 80 years hence part of today's conversation. It's critical, I think, that places like Westminster College and places like America's National Church and Museum engage the next generation. To hear stories from you, Bill, who were there, and remember Dr. Davidson, or to hear stories via the documents, the speech itself, which was an eyewitness to history, examining those primary sources to the next generation is something that only we can do here. I think it's something that you can't do when you're thumbing through your phone or scrolling the internet, and AI is a great tool, but there's nothing that replaces experiencing this church after knowing that it was bombed in the Blitz and rebuilt in here. There's power there. It's hard to describe what that is, but it's an emotional feeling. We were talking the other day about artificial intelligence and AI and how powerful and how quick it is. You can find an answer to almost anything. You can write you a paper, an essay, all of these powerful tools. But AI can't feel anything. There's no emotion there. And I think when you come in and you walk through the monument to the Berlin Wall, the concrete manifestation of the Iron Curtain that Churchill warned about, and you walk through it, you feel it. And you know about that ideological conflict that was in Korea that Churchill warned about here. Those are experiences that aren't artificial. I think they're incredibly powerful and real. And one of the things that we strive to do here at the college with the students and our faculty is to give these experiences. We also are introducing some of these ideas, objects, stories, monuments to the next generation. Yesterday, some of you were with us. We had 450 middle school and high school students with us in the historic gymnasium 80 years to the hour after when Churchill was here. And they spoke with Randy Otto, who's with us today. Randy Otto is a very talented actor and historian. You don't recognize him today because he's not dressed up as Churchill, but yesterday he was Winston Churchill. And these 450 young people heard the story. That's what we do. That's the 80 years hence. Planting those seeds so that that generation can be sparked and take these lessons of leadership, these lessons of liberty, democracy, freedom forward. Learning from people like Bill, learning from people like Dr. Davidson, learning from people like Don Lofi, who's carrying this legacy forward today, and all of the supporters and fellows of the museum that advocate for this special place, raise funds for this place. That's all important because we're investing in that next generation. So 80 years hence, I'd like to think that when they're celebrating the 160th anniversary of Winston Churchill's speech, there's a gathering very much like this today, in person, in this venerable space. And we're still talking about these ideas and ideals. I'm not going to be around. Bill's not, we're not going to be here. But I'm confident that the next generation will continue to tell these stories. And that, I think, is the one message I'd like to leave with all of you today. As we commemorate and look back, also think about ways to look ahead. That's what Churchill did throughout his life. And I think that's maybe the largest lesson we can take away from the speech in commemorations like this. So that's our story. We do have one other item of business, however, in this session. You mentioned Jack Marshall. Jack Marshall is an extraordinary individual. Many of you who are Westminster alum knew Jack. Jack was at the Iron Curtain speech too. In fact, he wrote a small little book, we have it in our library, about trying to obtain a ticket, and he finally got a ticket and he traveled halfway the country to get here. It started his lifelong affiliation with this place. He was a great Westminster advocate throughout his life, and here at Westminster College, annually, the Alumni Association honors an individual who embodies Jack Marshall's spirit. And this year, we normally do this, by the way, at Alumni Weekend in April. But Bill said he's coming back this month, but not next. And Bill has been honored with the Jack Marshall Award. So I'd like to invite Kurt Feigley and Don Lofi, president of Westminster College, up to the stage to give you a very well-deserved honor, the Jack Marshall Award.
Good morning. My name is Kurt Feigley. I'm pleased to be here today representing the Westminster Alumni Council. I'm a bit of a novice writing speeches. I'm also a novice presenting them. And that's mainly due to presentation anxiety. So bear with me while I read my notes. I have the extraordinary honor of presenting a special award that is typically granted to a deserving individual during Alumni Weekend. This year, however, we are bestowing the honor upon an individual who is not only a devoted member of our alumni community, this special person is also a Churchill Fellow, someone who is committed to the vision, resilience, and bold leadership associated with the former British Prime Minister, statesman, and wartime hero. I'm honored to present this year's Jack Marshall Alumni Loyalty Award. This award is presented to alumni who have demonstrated exceptional loyalty, commitment, and dedication to Westminster College through contributions of time, talent, and treasure. The award honors John Edwards Jack Marshall, an alumnus from the class of 1953. Jack was a Westminster institution who was deeply involved with the college throughout his entire life, earning him the moniker Mr. Westminster. Today's recipient, Mr. William E. Bill Reller, is a proud graduate of the class of 1956 who has embodied a spirit of service throughout his life. Mr. Reller majored in economics at Westminster and devoted his life's work to real estate development and investment in the Palo Alto, California area, where he is president of EWS Real Estate Investments. He made use of his career success by giving back consistently to his alma mater in countless ways by mentoring young professionals, making the lead gift responsible for creating the Davidson Leadership Plaza, establishing the Davidson Scholarship Endowment with his wife Carolyn, and faithfully serving more than 2 decades on the Westminster's Board of Trustees. As a member of Phi Delta Theta, he has demonstrated absolute selflessness in support of his beloved fraternity, doing so through scholarships and generous contributions to chapter fundraising. As a member of Westminster's most prestigious giving groups, including the Lifetime and Columns of Commitment societies, Mr. Reller is applauded by Westminster for the highly generous cumulative contributions he has made to the college throughout his course of a lifetime. According to Westminster Churchill, all the greatest things are simple. Many can be expressed in a single word: freedom, justice, honor, duty, mercy, hope. Mr. Reller embodies each of these ideals through a simple, focused dedication to Westminster College. His loyalty and leadership have made a lasting impact on our campus community and beyond, giving many students hope for the future. It is our pleasure today to present you the Jack Marshall Alumni Loyalty Award.
Let me just, absolutely. I just said a couple things. One, I knew Jack Marshall well. As I said, I came back here to meetings, met with the Davidsons, but I also always met with Jack, went to his house, had a drink. And graduated from Westminster 3 years before I did, but I watched his Westminster career for his entire life. And so we had a good, great relationship. You know, you listed these various qualities, and I think one is missing from me. And that quality, it's the most important thing for me.
Hopefully everybody can hear me. I've had, I mean it so sincerely, Bob Mulhauser introduced me to Bill 6 years ago. And Bill's been so kind to myself, his college, my family. We've always shared stories, had us to his house. But also, you were so kind to share some of the stories about Dr. Davison. And I had known some of them, but you heard Bill in his own words talk about it this morning. So those of you who are on campus a lot, we have a lot of stuff, to use the technical term, but there are some very good things. And in special recognition, which we knew we wanted to do for Bill today, we knew of the story of Dr. Davison. And so we have various historical pictures relative to past presidents, board members, et al. And we found a very one we hope you will put anywhere in your home, your house. It's very authentic. Kelsey Slaughter helped me put this together. We wanted to give this to you. If you take a minute to open it up, we hope you really enjoy this. That is an original picture, historical value, and I also do have a picture of a lady that I don't know if it was Dr. Davison's wife, but I plan to show that to you, and you're welcome to have it as well. So congratulations.
More personal. As I said, we came to Westminster 55, end of my junior year, and we did, it's that picture. He's just such a wonderful person. And, you know, to lead this place, to think what he did in the time that he was here, 17, 18 years, just absolutely remarkable. As we are here in this place, so much. And when he came here, there was no gold platter there for him, I'll tell you. He picked up what needed to be picked up and did. So, thank you all.
Well, thank you. That concludes this morning's sessions. For those of you, some of you asked, where can I find lunch in Fulton? There's some wonderful restaurants downtown, but the dining hall on campus is also to be recommended. I encourage you all to go up and have a spot of lunch. Our next session will begin in this space at 1:15, where Ambassador Ken Edelman will be with us to share his stories about the end of the Cold War. So once again, enjoy your lunch, and thank you all for being with us.